When the world goes quiet and the lights of the city fade into the distance, someone still has to keep watch. Security guards, the silent watchers of the night, walk through empty corridors, abandoned lots, and dark hallways where every echo feels a little too alive. Most people think their job is simple: check the cameras, make a few rounds, and wait for morning. But those who've truly worked the graveyard shift know the night hides more than shadows. Some things watch back, some things follow, and sometimes what you're guarding isn't what you think. These are three terrifying true stories from real security guards who saw things that defy explanation. Stories that will make you think twice before stepping alone into the dark. Welcome to Veil of Dread Horror Stories, where the line between duty and nightmare blurs with every heartbeat. If you love chilling true encounters and real-life terror, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because tonight you're on patrol with us. Story 1. The Man in the Monitor. I used to work the night shift at an office complex in Bristol, England, a group of old red brick buildings that once belonged to a textile company back in the 1920s. When I got the job, I thought it would be easy. I'd just sit in a warm office, drink some coffee, watch a few cameras, and walk around every hour or so. For the most part, that's exactly what it was. Until one night, last winter. That night changed the way I see dark rooms and flickering screens forever. I'd been working there for about 8 months. I knew every creak in the floors, every draft that slipped through the windows, every sound the old pipes made. The building was practically empty after 6 p.m. Only the occasional janitor or late-night accountant would hang around. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I'd check in with the morning crew, sign off, and head home while the sun came up. The CCTV room was my base, 12 screens stacked in 2 rows showing every corner of the complex, the car park, the hallways, the basement storage, and the main entrance. There were blind spots, of course, like the older stairwell on the east side where they never installed cameras because the wiring was too costly. It was a Friday night, early December. Cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. The wind outside had been howling since sunset, and the security lights outside the building flickered occasionally. Something I always hated. Flickering lights make shadows move in ways they shouldn't. Around midnight, the janitor finished mopping the lobby floors and waved me good night. That left me completely alone for the rest of the shift. Normally I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. But that night, something felt different. He left, and the silence that followed was heavier than usual, like the building itself was holding its breath. At around 12:30 a.m., I started my first patrol. Everything was fine. Doors locked, offices empty, heating humming quietly in the background. When I reached the east stairwell, I paused, as I always did. The stairwell was narrow, steep, and poorly lit. I never liked it, but I'd still shine my flashlight down just to be sure no one was there. That night, the beam cut through the darkness and I saw nothing, but I heard something, a faint scuffing sound like a shoe dragging on concrete, echoing from below. "Hello?" I called out, my voice bouncing up the stairwell. No answer. I told myself it was probably the wind or maybe rats in the basement. But the sound had been too distinct, too deliberate. Still, I didn't feel like investigating further. The basement door was always locked, and only maintenance had the keys. I kept moving. By the time I returned to the CCTV room, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it. I sat down, poured another cup of coffee, and started watching the screens again. That's when I noticed something odd. Camera 7, the east hallway, showed movement. There was a man walking slowly down the corridor, hands in his pockets, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned overcoat. He moved in and out of the light, head slightly bowed. I leaned closer to the monitor, squinting. The man didn't look like anyone I'd seen before. No badge, no uniform, no reflective vest like the janitor's. I grabbed the walkie-talkie and radioed the front desk, even though I knew no one was there. Then I checked the building access log on the computer. No new entries since the janitor had left. No doors opened, no key cards used. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but that made no sense. The east doors were deadlocked and alarmed. If anyone forced them, I'd hear it. I stared at the monitor again. The man had stopped walking. He was standing perfectly still now, right at the edge of the camera's view, half in shadow, half in light. I reached for the intercom mic and spoke into it. "Sir, this building is closed. Please identify yourself." No movement. He just stood there. I felt a wave of unease crawl through my chest. I switched to camera 8, the next one down the hallway. Empty. Camera 7 again. The man was gone. I replayed the footage. It showed him walking, stopping, and then, in a single frame, he wasn't there. Like he'd vanished between seconds. I checked all the cameras, thinking maybe he'd turned a corner. Nothing. Every hallway, every door, empty. I decided to do another patrol, this time focusing on the east wing. I took my flashlight, the radio, and a deep breath. The hallways were even quieter than before. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant ticking of a wall clock. As I walked toward the east corridor, I noticed something else. The air felt colder, not just chilly. Cold enough that I could see my breath. That had never happened inside before. The heating system was strong, and the doors were sealed. When I reached the corridor, I froze. There, near the stairwell, lay a wet footprint. Just one. Barefoot. The water was smeared slightly, as if someone had stepped in from outside, except it was bone dry beyond that spot. I followed it to the edge of the stairwell and shone my flashlight downward. The beam trembled in my hand. Standing halfway down the stairs was the man from the camera. He was facing me now. His skin looked pale, like paper. His eyes were black holes, not empty sockets, but deep shadows where eyes should have been. He tilted his head slowly, like an animal sizing up its prey. "Sir, you need to leave the building," I managed to say, though my voice came out as a whisper. He didn't move. Then, in a blink, the light flickered, and he was gone. I rushed down the stairs, heart hammering, flashlight scanning every corner. Nothing. The basement door was still locked. I tugged it hard, but it didn't budge. When I turned around, I saw the footprint again. Only now, there were more, leading up the stairs behind me. That was enough. I bolted back to the control room, slammed the door, and checked the monitors. Every camera was normal, except camera 7. It showed the corridor empty for a few seconds, then static. And through that static, a faint shape appeared, like a silhouette pressed against the screen from the inside. I killed the power to the monitors. I couldn't look at them anymore. I called my supervisor, told him someone had broken in, and stayed in the office until sunrise, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. When the morning crew arrived, I showed them the footage, or tried to. The recording was gone. Every frame from midnight to 4 a.m. was corrupted. The system log said manual deletion, but I never touched it. They replaced the DVR, changed the locks, and told me to take a week off. When I came back, everything seemed normal. But on my last night there, before I transferred to another job, I checked camera 7 one final time. For just a moment, before the screen fully loaded, I saw him, standing in the same spot, staring directly into the lens, and this time he smiled. Story 2. Ward 9. Wasn't empty. I've worked as a hospital security guard for almost 10 years, and I can say this with absolute certainty. The dead don't always stay quiet. My post was at a mid-sized hospital just outside Manchester. The place was old. The original building dated back to the 1940s. And although it had been renovated many times, the skeleton of the past still lingered in the walls. The corridors were narrow. The paint always seemed a little too pale. And every night shift came with that same smell, antiseptic and something else underneath, something metallic. Hospitals are strange after dark. By 11 p.m., most of the wards go silent, except for the occasional beeping monitor or the squeak of nurses' shoes. But there's another kind of sound that creeps in, one that doesn't belong. You only notice it if you've worked there long enough. A door shutting on its own. A whisper from a hallway you just cleared. A call light flashing in an empty room. I started on the night shift in 2017. There were 2 of us, me and another guard named Connor. We alternated rounds every hour. One of us would stay in the security office, watching the monitors, while the other made rounds through the wards, maintenance hallways, and parking lots. The part of the hospital I hated most was the old East Wing. It had been closed for years, ever since they built the new surgical building. They used to treat long-term patients there, mostly elderly ones. But after a fire in 2009, they moved everything out. The wing was still standing, though. They said it was too expensive to demolish. On the blueprints, it was listed as Ward 9. The first time I went near it, Connor warned me, "Don't bother checking the East Wing cameras," he said, half joking. "They pick up weird stuff sometimes." I laughed, thinking he meant glitches or rats triggering the motion sensors. But after a few months, I understood what he meant. It was a night in February, freezing cold, rain tapping against the windows like fingers. I was doing my 2 a.m. round when I heard the sound of an elevator bell. Ding! That was odd. The elevators were all locked after midnight. The sound came from the east side of the hospital, the part leading toward Ward 9. I radioed Connor. "Hey, you near the east elevators?" "No, I'm in the main lobby." "Why?" "Someone just called one of the lifts." He paused. "You sure? Nobody's supposed to be over there." I decided to check it out. I walked down the dim corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The walls here still had the old green paint from decades ago, chipped and peeling. When I reached the elevator, I noticed something strange. The digital display above the doors flickered between floors, 2, 3, 4, then stopped on B, the basement. The doors opened, empty. But inside, the floor was wet, as if someone had just walked out, dripping water. I stepped back, uneasy. That's when I noticed the corridor door beside the lift. The sign above it was faded, but I could still make out the words, Ward 9. The door should have been locked. I checked it every night, but when I tried the handle, it turned easily. "Connor," I whispered into the radio. "Ward 9 doors open. Static." I tried again. "Connor, you copy?" Nothing. I switched on my flashlight and stepped through. The air inside was freezing. My breath came out in white clouds. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight like ash. Everything was still. Rows of old hospital beds with sheets half draped, machines covered in plastic, cabinets left half open. I started walking down the main hallway. My boots echoed softly against the linoleum floor. Every room I passed was dark except one. Near the end, faint light spilled from under the door. As I got closer, I heard something, a woman's voice, low, almost humming. I froze. The sound came from that lit room. "Hello?" I called. The humming stopped. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then, the sound of movement, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. "Hello?" "This area's restricted," I said again, louder now, though my voice shook. No answer. I pushed the door open with the tip of my flashlight. The room was empty, or at least it looked that way at first. There was an old hospital bed in the corner, the sheets yellowed with age. A single fluorescent light flickered weakly overhead. The air smelled like mildew and disinfectant. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the dark window, behind me, stood a woman. She wore a hospital gown, pale blue, and her head was slightly tilted to one side. Her hair was wet, clinging to her face. Her eyes, they weren't focused on me, but somewhere past me, as if she was looking at something far away. I turned around. No one was there. The reflection was gone. I took a step back, heart racing. Then, behind the bed, I heard a faint, wet breathing sound. I raised my flashlight and stepped closer. Nothing. Just the bed and the sound of dripping water. The ceiling light flickered violently for a moment, and then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. That's when the radio came back to life. Connor's voice, frantic. "Mate, are you in the East Wing? Get out now. I'm seeing movement on the cameras. Someone's in there with you." I didn't wait to ask questions. I bolted down the hallway, past the empty rooms, past the elevator. As I reached the end, something cold brushed against my shoulder. A hand, light as air. I didn't look back. When I got to the main corridor, Connor was waiting. His face was pale. "Mate, what the hell were you doing in there?" he said. "You weren't supposed to go inside." "The door was open," I said, panting. "Someone was humming in there. Did you see anyone on the feed?" He nodded, slowly. "Yeah, but I don't think it was a person." He showed me the footage later. At 2:07 a.m., the camera facing Ward 9's corridor lit up. The door, which should have been locked, opened on its own. A few minutes later, I appeared, walking inside. Behind me, faintly visible in the corner of the screen, was a figure. A woman in a hospital gown, standing motionless. As I moved deeper, she followed, staying just out of the flashlight's beam. But the strangest part was the timestamp. The figure appeared 2 minutes before I entered the wing. They checked the door's lock the next day. It was rusted shut, hadn't been opened in years. Maintenance said the hinges had sealed from corrosion, meaning it would have taken serious force to open it. So how did I walk through it? Like it was nothing. A week later, The hospital's head of security asked me to stop mentioning it. "There's no such place as Ward 9 anymore," he said. "That wing's been closed and renamed since 2010. I looked it up later. He was right. On all the current maps, Ward 9 doesn't exist. But sometimes, when the cameras glitch late at night, I still see a faint light flicker on the east side of the building. And if you look closely enough, you can see her standing by the window." Story 3. The Last Shift at Brookside Mall. You don't really understand loneliness until you've stood inside an empty shopping mall at 3 a.m. with every store dark and every sound echoing back at you like the building is breathing. That's what my nights were like at Brookside Mall, a once busy shopping center on the outskirts of Leeds that had been shut down for redevelopment. The last of the stores closed about 2 years before I started guarding it. Since then, it was just a hollow shell, a few working lights, some leftover signage, and a lot of empty space. I was hired through a private security firm that handled low-risk sites, warehouses, old offices, places waiting for demolition. Most of the time, my job was to make sure no one broke in or set fires. Teenagers, squatters, or thieves looking for copper wiring. That sort of thing. Brookside wasn't supposed to be different. But from my first night, something felt off. The manager told me I'd be the only one on site from midnight to 6 a.m. There were cameras, but half of them didn't work. The control room was on the top floor, overlooking the food court, and from there I could see down into the empty atrium, glass skylights, fake plants covered in dust, and the silent escalators that once carried crowds. It was hauntingly beautiful in its own way. The first few nights were uneventful. I made my rounds, checked the doors, logged the time. Occasionally I'd hear a rat scuttling or the sound of water dripping from a broken pipe. But around the fourth night, strange things started happening. It began with the music. At exactly 1:17 a.m., I heard faint elevator music coming from somewhere in the distance, the kind of soft, jazzy tune malls used to play over the speakers. At first, I thought maybe someone had left an old radio on, but when I followed the sound, it always seemed to move. One moment near the old H&M, then near the food court, then gone completely. I checked the speaker system in the control room. It had been disconnected years ago. The next night, the music came again, this time accompanied by something else, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing down the tiled corridor. I looked at the monitors. On camera 5, the one facing the central escalator, there was movement. A figure, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a dark hooded coat, walking slowly across the atrium floor. I couldn't make out any details. The camera resolution was terrible, and the feed flickered constantly. "Hello?" I called over the intercom, my voice shaky. "Security, you're trespassing." The figure stopped, turned its head toward the camera, and then the feed cut to static. I ran down to the atrium, flashlight in hand, trying to sound braver than I felt. My footsteps echoed across the tiles. When I reached the escalator, there was no one there. But on the glass railing, I noticed something strange. A handprint, smudged, as if someone had pressed their palm against it recently. The print was wet and cold. That night, I didn't sit down again. I patrolled nonstop until dawn, jumping at every sound. The next day, I asked my supervisor if any workers or cleaners had access overnight. He said no. "You're the only one with a key," he said. The place is sealed. Just keep logging your rounds and don't let the locals scare you with ghost stories. Ghost stories. Apparently, years ago, before Brookside shut down, there had been an incident. A security guard found dead in one of the service corridors. They said it was a heart attack, but some of the old staff claimed he'd been chasing someone who broke in and never came back up. I didn't believe it, not yet, but things got worse. A week later, I was doing my 3 a.m. round when the lights flickered and went out for about 5 seconds. When they came back on, every store gate was open. Every single one. That was impossible. The gates were mechanical and needed keys to lift. I checked them every shift. My hands were shaking as I walked past the storefronts. Empty clothing racks, shattered glass, dusty mannequins standing frozen in the dark. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the mannequins was facing the wrong way. It was turned toward the hallway, head tilted slightly, as if watching me. I could have sworn it wasn't like that before. I took a few steps back, then turned to head toward the exit. That's when I heard the sound of the escalator moving. I froze. The power to the escalators had been cut off months ago. Yet there it was, humming softly, the metal steps rolling upward as if inviting me to ride. And halfway up stood the figure I'd seen on the camera, motionless, head down, the same long coat brushing the steps. I raised my flashlight. "Hey, stop right there!" The light hit its face, and I realized it wasn't a coat at all. It was skin. Its entire body was gray and stretched thin like old rubber. The head was bald, the features blurred, almost melted. And where its eyes should have been were two deep hollows. The thing tilted its head up and let out a low, wet sound, somewhere between a breath and a groan. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. When I looked again, it was gone. I ran to the control room, slammed the door, and locked it. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I pulled up the cameras again. The atrium was empty. But on camera 5, in the far corner of the screen, I could see myself, sitting at the control desk. Only, I wasn't alone. Something stood directly behind me. I turned around so fast I nearly fell out of the chair. Nothing there. When I looked back at the monitor, the figure was gone. The rest of the night was a blur of paranoia. Every sound made me jump. Every flicker of the screen felt like it was about to show that thing again. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I was done. I told my supervisor I quit. He didn't even ask why. Just sighed and said, "You're the third one this month." Before I left, I met the new guard who was taking over my shift. A guy named Paul. Friendly, confident, the kind who thought ghost stories were nonsense. I wished him luck, but deep down, I felt sick about leaving him there. 3 nights later, I got a call from my supervisor. His voice was trembling. "They found Paul this morning," he said. "In the atrium. Heart failure, they think." Then, almost whispering, he added, "The CCTV shows him walking up the escalator at 3:02 a.m. The power was off." I never went back to Brookside Mall, but sometimes I still dream about it. I see the atrium, dark, empty, echoing. The escalator starts moving, and I hear that same soft music playing over the speakers. Then I see it, the thing on the steps, waiting, and I wake up before it reaches the top.